zone, or it was part of a de-escalation zone signed, that deal by Russia, Turkey. It has never appeared to be that way. We've seen so much violence. How significant is this?
Well, it's very significant. The regime's strategy here is very simple. What they're attempting to do is encircle cities, besiege them, and then launch an unprecedented wave of airstrikes. Let's not forget that this is a regime force that's backed by powerful Russian Air Force, and strikes that have been completely unprecedented, that have really worn down rebel forces and their ability to defend a major urban area that had at one point over 100,000 civilians. So now it's a question of where those civilians are going to go. We've seen some really harrowing footage of these buildings, apartment buildings, collapsing under these massive airstrikes, a wave of airstrikes that then allows the regime to gradually encircle these cities. It's a strategy that we've seen employed by the regime and their Russian advisors and Russian Air Force in a number of other places throughout the country. And it seems now that the regime has effective fire control over the M5 highway, and they are attempting to encircle Khan Sheikhoun. This is also a city that just a couple of years ago was the site of a major chemical weapon strike by the Assad regime forces against rebels and against an opposition-held town. It's also a question of what happens when these towns fall under the control and occupation of regime forces. We've seen a number of other opposition-held cities that have fallen under the regime, a wave of arrests and detentions by regime forces against the civilian populace that's remained there. So a significant amount of concern of what happens next to those civilians that are caught in the crossfire, a diplomatic agreement, the Astana process that really does not seem to have worked.
And meanwhile, this is also a region where many of the people who were forced from other parts of Syria have fled to. I believe the UN is saying that more than 400,000 people have had to flee their homes since the attacks on Idlib began. Let's talk a little bit about what happens next. The 8 years of war. This is the last rebel stronghold in Syria. So what happens after this?
It's a very good question, because there is nowhere else to go for these civilians. Khan Sheikhoun was a place where tens of thousands of other civilians from other parts of Syria that have fallen under the control of the regime once believed that they were safe. And now they're being pushed further north into Idlib province in northwestern Syria, closer to the Turkish border. There's really nowhere else for them to go as regime airstrikes and Russian airstrikes pound these opposition-held cities. So a big tragedy for the civilians, major advance for regime forces backed by the Russian Air Force.
Thanks so much for that. That's TRT World's defense analyst Oubai Shahbandar.